Hello, and welcome back to the Phoenix's Tale, the weekly Harry Potter themed podcast where I am sharing my life story through a chapter by chapter analysis of the entire Harry Potter series. My name is Gabe. Welcome. You can call me Phoenix if you want to, I'll answer to either one. And this week we are going to dive into Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, Chapter 2 The Vanishing Glass. To briefly take a breath. To briefly recap the chapter, we open with a description of number 4 Privet Drive some 10 years later. Nothing much has changed. Harry's still living there, but we really start to see what the conditions are going to be like for Harry moving forward anytime he's with the Dursleys. He sleeps in a cupboard under the stairway as opposed to an actual bedroom. There are no photographs of him. He's wearing Dudley's old hand-me-down clothes. And on the day in question that this chapter takes place, it is Dudley's birthday. So Harry's expected to get up and cook the breakfast, make sure everything's okay and perfect for Dudley's birthday. Through a strange twist of fate, maybe? I don't know. Mrs. Fig, the crazy cat lady neighbor, is unable to take Harry while the Dursleys and Dudley's friend Piers Polkiss go to the zoo this year for Dudley's birthday, so they end up taking Harry with him. Everything's fine until after lunch. They get to the reptile house, and Harry gets into a conversation with a Brazilian rainbow boa constrictor. Okay, what the hell is going on with Harry? For those who haven't read the books, just hang in there. Um, at one point, Dudley's friend Pierce, sees this snake having this conversation and shouts for Mr. Dursley, for Uncle Vernon and Dudley to, hey, come check this out. Dudley, in true Dudley fashion, shoves Harry out of the way. And Harry, being unable to control his magic powers at this point, like any young witch or wizard before they go off to Hogwarts, makes the glass to the snake enclosure disappear, and the snake disappears. Quick tip for those of you who have not read the books at all, who have not seen the movies, you're reading along as I do this podcast. We see the snake later. So just remember that. Okay. So this is where I am going to shift the focus of conversation for this chapter to my life, because one of the things that I have learned about myself is that I am autistic. And that means that along with my father's verbally abusive ways throughout my entire childhood, I was often left feeling so confused so many times when I would be in trouble for something, specifically with my father. Um, and the reason why this has to do with my autism is that I'm the type of person that I need to understand things. I mean, you can tell me what a law, a rule, a guideline, whatever. But if it does not make sense to me as is, I often need context. I need to know the why, I need to know the how. And like Harry, with all these weird things that they talk about in this chapter happening to him that he cannot explain, and yet he's getting in trouble for this stuff. And viciously, from what I understand. I know that at one point I read in an interview or something that J.K. Rowling said that initially Uncle Vernon was physically abusive to Harry, but for a children's book, you can't really have that in there. So I think she kind of shifted that to Dudley with, the way, he's always beating up on Harry, and, Harry doesn't have any friends at school because none of the kids in school wanted to mess with Dudley and his little gang at school. Um, so getting back to what I was saying about the autism is, um, this is something that makes perfect sense to me now. That, oh, this is kind of somewhat linked to this. But yeah, like Harry, there were so many times in childhood that I just did not understand why I was getting in trouble. Why is my father shouting at me again? And to put some context into this before you jump into the comments and start saying, well, you did this and you did that. No, I raised a child myself. Okay, not alone. I had my mom, I had my baby brother to help. So my son grew up in a much healthier, calmer, you can talk to us kind of environment. And since my mom and my brother were very good about deferring anything really to me because I'm his mother, there were times where I would have flashbacks of things when my son was older. I would say from school age, from about 5 up until about, 10, 12 years old, that I would have flashbacks on things of something that he would do. And I remember immediately thinking, why was this such a big deal to my father? This is the kind of shit that would have got me yelled at, screamed at, insulted, not explaining things well. And maybe that has something to do with it. But in retrospect, none of the things that my son did that would constitute being in trouble were that big a deal. And I could tell from just the vibes and the energy from my mom, from my brother, that they felt the same way. Okay, this is just something kids do. You have to educate and guide them and explain things to them because they don't understand. And we're going to throw being very emotionally immature into the mix with my father as far as that goes. But oh my God, the confusion that I felt reading this chapter, I feel Harry's confusion. And the crazy thing is that so many of my memories from childhood are gone because of all of the abuse, because of all the trauma I've carried my entire life. First with a childhood like that, and second with the last 12 years of my life of PTSD, raw dogging it because mental health care where I live here in Michigan really sucks. I have been seeking help recently. I sought help after the initial trauma event when I knew something's wrong here. I've dealt with depression, anxiety, and 2 nervous breakdowns at the time. And, it's not those things, but there is something wrong, and nobody would listen to me. Just like the Dursleys never listened to Harry when anything went wrong that seemed to be his fault. Nobody seemed to explain anything to him. So I understand just how confused Harry must have been throughout his entire childhood with all these reactions. The other thing that I want to talk about real quick, and I didn't put it in my notes, is when we go back to the zoo before lunch, and Harry kind of, hanging back. He didn't want to be hanging out with the Dursleys, but, keep them in sight, obviously. That's kind of how I always operated. It was like, okay, maybe if I do this or if I don't do that, and just this internal dialogue going all of the time. And this feeling of Harry should have known it wasn't going to last. He was having a pretty good day up to that point. And then he accidentally let the snake loose and didn't understand that he was responsible for it. But yeah, I cannot tell you how many times I would beat up on myself. I did the wrong thing again because now my dad's yelling. He's insulting us. I get that. I really, really felt that. I'm going to adjust my camera here a little bit because it's, there, better. Okay. So, what where I was going with this was because of all the trauma, a lot of my memories just, they're gone. But a lot of the emotions are still there. I remember how, just constantly feeling that state of confusion that I just mentioned around so many situations. The other thing where I felt connected to Harry's story and Harry's narrative in this chapter was being left to figure shit out for myself. Again, with no explanation, nothing. It's like, oh, she's fine. She's got this. She can figure it out. And yet I would figure it out wrong, and it was just a mess. And the constant knot in my stomach of never knowing when my father was just going to erupt, whether it was with me, whether it was with my brothers, it didn't matter. I just had this constant knot in my stomach because we never knew what to expect from him when he would come home from work, or we never knew what to expect from him, in this given situation or that given situation. So, like Harry, I was often confused as to what it was that I did to bring about this punishment of some kind. And I have to tell you, when I became a mom, there were things that my son did, and I just mentioned this, that would trigger those flashbacks. I can't imagine doing anything because I did everything I thought I could do to avoid that. And yet I could never avoid that. You get where I'm going here with that. So let me throw a little PSA out there to any parents who understand what I'm about to say, that when our kids do something, yes, they frustrate us. Yes, they, irritate us. Yes, they make us outright angry. But I'm talking about the frustrating type stuff that just, really? And then you can take a breath and then start explaining things to your kids. When I tell you, as a mother, that I'm willing to bet most of the things that I did were not a big deal because of the flashbacks I was having when I was raising my son to some of the same things that he did, that I was just, why did my dad completely lose his shit for stuff like this? They were really the no big deal type of things, parents out there. So you know what I mean. Especially those of you who dealt with some sort of childhood abuse and thankfully in turn did not do the same to your own children. You had that self-awareness to not do that. They are really not that big a deal. Kids will be kids, and the whole point is you have to teach them, you have to educate them, you have to speak to them at their level, however old they are, not at an adult level. So, as you might imagine, this left me with some heavy-duty people-pleasing as I got older. And because, like I said, I did not want to get in trouble for anything, because that's what that meant for me. Being yelled at, being insulted to the point where I'm in tears, and not really getting a lot of comfort or emotional support from my mother. All I remember from her is, what are you crying about now? Stop being such a poop. Snap out of it. How do you expect a fucking 8-year-old mom to convey feelings that, as an adult who has been in her head her entire goddamn life, who has a bachelor's degree in psychology and understands the concepts of child development, of human development when it comes to thinking and thought processes and managing emotions and anything that falls under the umbrella of psychology? Why? Why? It was like it was an inconvenience to her. And those are the type of things, I may have mentioned it last week, that I am processing with my mother. But again, it's much easier for me with a lot less hostility to process those things, because there is one thing, and I will die on this hill, that I have never doubted from my mother, and that was her love for me. And she really did the best she could. But yes, she too is also a bit emotionally immature. My father is just full on emotionally immature, and he's a fucking idiot. So there you go. But yeah, this chapter really forced me to unpack a lot of this, just to make my notes and get this, get this episode written, get this episode set up, so I knew what I wanted to say to all of you. But um oh my god, trying to break those people pleasing habits and trying to see my hypervigilance as a superpower at this point, because that hypervigilance, along with the autistic superpowers that I got in my autistic basket of goodies, if you will, specifically being an empath, being highly sensitive, and having strong pattern recognition skills. My brain always looks for patterns in things. So you combine that with the trauma that created the people pleasing and the hypervigilance. I tend to read people very well too. Their vibes, their energy, they don't have to say anything. So turning that around in my mind, and thinking of it as a superpower, has been part of the process for me. But um, as I mentioned earlier, my autism certainly did heighten my sense of confusion and isolation in a way, because it was only recently that I realized I'm autistic. I mentioned that. So navigating through such times in my life, coupled with that verbal abuse from my father, um, created this environment where I felt like everything I did, everything I thought, everything I believed, everything I was interested, etc., was wrong. Basically, my father raised me to show me that I am being a human being incorrectly. And that certainly exacerbated the confusion and the isolation. Um, but looking through the lens of now being aware of my autism and what that means for me, it's actually helped explain to me, to actually show me that I was never wrong. I'm beginning to see and learn just how much of my weirdness as a child, and by that I mean the things that I did that left me feeling like I never quite fit in with my peer groups, my friends, um, work, school, my own family. In many ways, I feel like I am such an outsider here. Or the worst part of it, that never quite fitting in, is like I'm just outside. I'm outside looking in through the window while everybody else is doing their thing, living their life. They don't seem to be getting things wrong, and if they do get things wrong, it's not on the monumental scale that I felt I always got things wrong. So I have been finding an enormous amount of relief lately, and healing too, um, because I understand now what it means to be autistic. I'm still learning a lot of things, but it has explained everything. And quite frankly, that is just how my brain works. And being able to reconcile all those moments I remember feeling like I was just outside the social circle I was in, whether it was the friend group or my family, etc., just having an explanation, this is why all these things happen. This is why you always felt these things. This is why you always thought these things. This is why you always did these things. This is pretty typical for somebody who's autistic, who presents with, the empathy and being highly sensitive and needing context and needing to be able to ask questions because I don't understand, instead of being told I'm being difficult on purpose. No, I genuinely don't understand. And you are not explaining things to me in a way that makes sense so that I can make sense of the very concept. It just becomes such a downward spiral. But I have been loving figuring out that I am autistic and what that means to me. So when I think about Harry's thought about knowing that things were too good to last when they were at the zoo, like I just mentioned, I feel that to my core every time I reread this series and I read this chapter. And the thing that sucks about all this, basic human development, psychological development, in true childhood fashion, I didn't put that on my father. Like, he's being a fucking idiot. He's not explaining things well. He's losing his shit over stupid things. No, I put that on myself. That's what kids do. That is just what kids do. End of discussion. Oops. I talk with my hands a lot. Have you noticed that? And the reality is that it was my father's extremely limited view on life because that's what his parents were. I mean, I can clearly see where this comes from in him. And I know that's where my stuff comes from me. It's our parents, it's our caregivers, it's whoever raises us when we're children. That's where we learn the rules of life. And the rules of life, to me, growing up, were so fucking confusing because I was always in trouble for things I never understood why I was in trouble in the first place. So I think what I really want to say here, where I can boil this down, is that nothing I did was wrong. For me. It was wrong for my father, but I never did anything wrong. I got a great story for you, and I'll tell it real quick. And I call it, what do I call it? I usually title all these little stories, but very quickly, this was August of 1993. I was going back to school for the first time after high school. I graduated in 89. And I was ready to go back to school because I wanted better job opportunities. You know the drill. So I go back to our local community school, and naturally, any college student will tell you this, there is usually at least one semester, if not an entire year, so 2 semesters, of a foreign language. That's just part of the curriculum, and just about everybody, no matter what major they are going into, has to have at least 1 semester of a foreign language. Well, my little community college in California, Redding, California, Shasta College, had German. It wasn't just Spanish or French. We had German. And for me, this was one of those obsessions since childhood. Just something about Germany fascinated me. And I don't mean the Third Reich, World War II, Heil Hitler bullshit. Just the culture and the language and everything about it just fascinated me. So my almost 22-year-old brain was saying, I get to finally learn how to speak German. Holy fucking shit, sign me up. So I did. Naturally, the people in my life around me were interested in that choice and would ask with curiosity why. And I would explain this. I don't know where this obsession came from, or this fascination, whatever you want to call it. But I have been fascinated with Germany and learning about Germany's history, not just World War II, but all of it. And learning about the culture, which means learning about the language, would probably a pretty good idea. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's cool. Wow. Okay. Not my father. No. He asked the question, and before I could answer the question, he said, "Why don't you take something more practical like Spanish or French?" I'm going to give him Spanish because, like I said, I was living in California at the time. French? Really? French is more practical in your brain than German. I knew then that English was a Germanic language. It has the word German right there. It is a Germanic language. So how in the flying fuck can you tell me that French is more practical? We didn't live here in Michigan, where, yes, French probably would be a lot more practical. We're like a stone's throw from Quebec, Canada. We don't live in Louisiana. Again, French would be practical in Louisiana, but not fucking California. If we're going to eliminate Spanish as a possibility for me, which I later went on and took classes in Spanish and wasn't as fluent as I was in German, but you know, it was a smart second language to learn being a California resident. But the French, goddamn, that fucking... Yeah. I mean, here we are literally nearly 32 years later, and it still fucking makes me laugh because this is how my father's dumbass brain works, okay? It's just... French is more practical. But you see what I mean? That's the point. And if I had had enough of the healing, if I had had the balls to speak my mind and speak my truth and just say, I would have said, well, when you go back to school and have to take a foreign language, you can take the more practical French. I'm fucking taking German because I'm interested in learning how to speak German because I am interested in the culture. And if that is not good enough for you, fuck off. I'll have to tell you guys one day about what actually happened, my last interaction with him. But that's for another time. Another aspect of this chapter that I want to touch on is how the Dursleys blatantly favored Dudley, obviously, over Harry, which is not unlike being the parentified daughter in my family. I talk more about that next week because I have a different thought process with actual research that I pulled up that we're going to talk about here in a minute. But I was expected as the parentified daughter because I'm the eldest in my family. My two brothers are younger than I am. My parents split up when I was 11. Divorce was final on my 12th birthday. And in true Gen X fashion, my brothers and I were latchkey kids. So guess who was responsible when mom and dad weren't around? Yeah. I was expected to shoulder responsibilities that my brothers just didn't have. I was left to figure out shit by myself with little to no instructions. And more specific to my autism, without clear, so I could understand instructions. I cannot tell you how many times I am certain my parents would assume that I wasn't fine, when in truth I wasn't. There were times throughout my childhood where I felt outright favoritism by my parents toward my brothers that I never got because I could take care of myself. And when the reality was that I had to take care of myself because my parents weren't bothered to ensure that I was okay. And because of my father's reactions to my behaviors, I often felt like I did life wrong. Like I said earlier, I was being a human being incorrectly. Another aspect to this was being responsible for my brothers, who did not respect me in that way. And this was exceptionally stress inducing for me. I think you get the point. I was hyper vigilant. I like this constant narrative in my head. Oh, if I do this, if I do this, I do this. And just always second guessing myself and always being wrong. When I think I did something right, my father would find fault with it. And I used to say when I was younger, working through all this, that I could I could get straight A's. He would find fault. I could find the cure for cancer, AIDS at the time, that was a big one, and the common cold, and he would still find fault. So, getting back to my brothers, and a bit of resentment that I have with that is that the reason why it was stress inducing, obviously, was because I knew I would be the one to get in trouble, even though they were the ones that actively ignored me because I'm not mom. They don't have to do what I say, even though mom said, you listen to your sister. So if they had gone off riding their bikes, we lived not far from the school we attended at the time. And they would go ride bikes so they could go play on the playground out there, like on the weekends and stuff like that. And if they didn't tell me and something happened, I would have gotten in trouble for that. Not them for disobeying me. I would have gotten in trouble for it, flat out. So, yeah. That favoritism, the overt favoritism toward Dudley as opposed to Harry, that was another, that one landed hard. That one landed really hard. Thankfully, nothing bad happened to my brothers, so, you know, I'm grateful for that in the long run, but to put that kind of shit on a 12-year-old shoulders, yeah, to say I grew up fast is an understatement. And the fact that I was in junior high for the worst of this, I know a lot of people, oh, high school was the worst. Not for me. High school was great because I went to high school here in Michigan. And naturally, my dad stayed in California. And he only agreed to it as long as, on my mother's dime, got us back to California every summer. So I got a 9-month reprieve from him. High school was great for me, but we can all agree, no matter how we feel about high school, that junior high is the absolute fucking worst because we are all hitting puberty. And for me, that meant a lot of heavy duty things. Like I said, next week we're going to talk more about the parentified daughter aspect to this. But I just remember thinking that all of my fellow female classmates were stupid. Who gives a shit about who's popular and who's not? Who gives a shit who made the cheerleading squad or not? Who gives a shit about clothes, boys, makeup, hair, blah, 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 blah? Because I still, to this day, and I can remember the layout of the house we were living in. This is how deeply ingrained this is in my head. I can still hear my mother's sobs as she's crying herself to sleep. Many nights over the 3-year period between their separation and we finally moving back here to Michigan, because she's holding down 3 jobs just to keep a roof over her head and food on the table. Meanwhile, my father is over there bitching about having to pay child support. He's over there bitching about having to pay $600 a month. That was not per child. That was total. It was $200 a month per child. And he had one lame ass excuse after another. He was always late with his child support. I see the real world when I'm 12, 13, 14 years old. So yeah, my female classmates were the dumbest fucking people on the planet. I felt like, because they were worrying about shit that does not matter. When I can see the struggle my mother's going through, I hear her sobs at night as she's crying herself to sleep, wondering how she's going to hold everything together, taking care of 3 kids on her own, while my jackass father is bitching about or making a lame excuse about why child support is late again. So, as a result, I don't give a shit about that stuff. I don't wear makeup. My hair is my hair. I wear clothes that are comfortable for me. I don't care about a lot of stuff because at the end of the day, it is just fucking stupid and ridiculous. And to be in junior high, to have that mindset, I think you're kind of getting the picture here. So I want to talk about an aspect of Harry's personality here that he, even at the age of 10, could have, in enduring this blatant abuse, blatant favoritism towards the other child in the house. Harry could have ended up being bitter and angry and subsequently have been just an awful, terrible human being, as awful as the Dursleys were to him, yet he didn't. We see Harry as a very sweet child who was grateful for whatever scraps of goodness he received. And in this chapter, it was, the lemon popsicle that Uncle Vernon bought for him. Even just being able to finish what was left of Dudley's sundae because it wasn't made right. And, okay, well, let's just let Harry have that. And then Dudley gets a brand new sundae. Harry was so grateful for that. It was like, ooh, this is really good. And even when in the chapter they were talking about the sweater that Aunt Petunia tried to make Harry wore, that was just absolutely hideous. Brown with orange pom-poms. Yeah. We all know Harry made the sweater shrink, but thankfully he escaped punishment on that one because Aunt Petunia thought it just shrunk in the wash. So, Harry is grateful for whatever little scraps of whatever that he gets. And he keeps away from the family as much as possible. Not unlike my escapes to my bedroom. I was a loner type child. Okay. Because that was safe for me. Go to my room, shut the door, retreat to my imagination, and act out, journal, whatever was in my head to escape what was outside my bedroom door. It was peace. It was quiet. Highly sensitive much, Miss Autistic? Yeah, see? Thankfully, we were lucky to live just down the road from the elementary school we attended. I mentioned that just a little bit ago. Because we could, walk down, ride our bikes down to, the school and play on the playground, etc., etc. Unfortunately, none of my friends that I had at the time lived close enough, even riding my bicycle over to their house. So I was stuck with whatever kids happened to be around. There were about, 4 other houses where we lived. Some of them had kids. our next door neighbors had grandsons who would visit in the summer. That was always fun. Um, so, yeah, there was a little bit of that neighborhood kids type thing, but not much. Not much. It was pretty isolating on the whole. My primary forms of escape, like I said, were retreating to my bedroom and more specifically to my imagination. So you can clearly see how early in life my isolation protected me. And when we pull all of this together, we can clearly see that I am an empath. Maybe that happens by chance, such as with autistics. I know a lot of autistics present as low empathy, but then other autistics present as being like an outright empath. I'm talking damn near Deanna Troi from Star Trek The Next Generation level of empath. And we are going to see throughout the series that so is Harry. Um, and I may be developing an argument that Harry may be autistic because of all that too, but that's for another time. But we do see this play out throughout the entire series, and we see it most prevalently in this chapter by the behavioral differences between Harry and Dudley at this point. So I want to go back real quick and talk about the scraps of goodness that I talked about. Thankfully, because I never questioned my mother's love for me, which has been making processing what she did wrong a lot easier, because she didn't do it out of hate or I don't even know. I don't even know where to go to describe it with my father at this point, but my mother was most prevalent in that, giving out the scraps of goodness, and not cruelly or intentionally, but for lack of finances. So I'm just looking at my notes here. There's something interesting that just popped into my head. Um, on the whole, I think I probably had the most stable, if you will. It was a lot more of a shock to me growing up after the divorce than it was, say, for Michigan brother, the baby of the family, because he was only about 5 when all this went down. So by the time he started school, mom and dad are split up. And things were a lot harder for us financially. Like I said, mom's holding 3 jobs. Dad's late for the child support because of some lame ass reason. So, I mean, I was like 12 years old. But by the time we get to the divorce, things were a lot more dire for us financially as a family, excluding my father. He can just fuck off. So it was a lot more difficult for us, for her to treat us to things. She did her best. She really did. But just something as simple as being able to have pizza for dinner, you know. For us, it was Round Table Pizza there in Reading. Or buying something that we wanted, you know, just something little. I mean, like I said, she was working 3 jobs at the time. And one of the good things that actually kind of helped a little bit was one of the 3 jobs she was working was at a video store. And this was this was before, for those who remember video stores, this was before Hollywood Video and Blockbuster Video. I mean, all the video stores, they were mom and pop type places. And the owner and manager of our store, they had 2 stores in town. The one my mom had gotten hired at and we were working at, it was the husband who was the onager. The onager? I just made up a new word, onager. An owner and the manager. He's an onager. But the store she worked in, you know, he had 2 twins, 16-year-old and an 8-year-old daughter. So it was more of a family vibe. So my brothers and I were also allowed to work there. We got paid $1 an hour. And then he also came up with an idea that we could each claim a video. Um, and VHS tapes at the time, they were expensive to purchase. So we would have to have enough rentals to pay off the purchase price. But then after that, we would get $1 for every rental. And this is back in the day when VHS rentals were like $3-4 a night. That was the norm. But it was money. Okay. It was a little bit of money. Um, and that's where the scraps of goodness moments that popped up when I was doing the research, that's primarily where they were centered, was just at the age of 12 being able to have a little job and earn $1 an hour and $1 for any time the movie I chose was rented by somebody. Um, I couldn't, I lost my track on my notes. I lost track of my notes. Hold on. Uh, oh, there it is. Okay, popped up when I was researching. Yeah, that's where the bulk of it was. Um, and that was the most prevalent. Like I said, what's important here is that this speaks to a higher sense of my hyper independence because, and I am seriously struggling with this right now and trying to work through, but it's difficult because I don't have that emotional safe space with my mom and Michigan brother, the baby brother. So right now, yeah, anything and everything that I need to do that I might need help with, I have to figure it out myself because I don't trust them on that level. I have zero friends. Literally, my social circle right now is my son, my mom, and my baby brother. So, um, but it all started there because I couldn't count on the adults around me who were supposed to protect me and love me and make me feel safe. At least I had that little $1 an hour job and I could take care of myself and treat myself and get myself some things that I wanted here and there. And then I could escape to my bedroom where I could envision a much better life for myself. What sort of life did I want when I became an adult? That sort of thing. So, unlike Harry, however, I never really had any real world mental escape to look forward to. Especially after my parents' divorce, there were a lot of times where I just wanted my father to go away and leave us alone. Harry, at least, had the fun of thinking about attending a different school than Dudley when classes resumed in the fall. Um, I talked all about that. So, getting that 9 month reprieve once we moved here and high school was so much better for me, yada, yada, yada. Um, Feeling like I actually had friends in my life who saw me and heard me, and I could just start to be more myself, whatever the hell that meant. Um, yeah, I didn't have that until we knew that we were going to be moving, and I couldn't wait because all I could see is I don't have to deal with my father for 9 months out of the year. So, in this sense, I could really understand Harry's excitement about being able to attend a different school than Dudley. So then maybe he could make friends of his own because Dudley and most of his gang were going to go to smeltings. We talk about that next week for those who don't know the story. Um, and Harry was going to go to the local secondary school, which is what they call, I think is called a secondary school, but I think that junior high and high school. I need to brush up on some of my British knowledge here. I've been watching a lot of Top Gear with Jeremy, James, and Richard. Don't know how the school system goes there, but I want to talk about the symbolism of the snake escaping from the zoo. This is a theme that has resonated throughout my entire life, as best as I can remember, because Okay, let me give you an example. So, you know how they're always, especially you ask kids this, if you could be any animal, what would you want to be? And I always said something like a cat or a dolphin, when in truth, this is how deeply my father scarred me, because I can still remember this. I didn't necessarily want to say it was a bird, but a bird makes sense because a bird can fly and go anywhere it wants to go. That was my true answer. But I never said that because somehow that was going to be wrong. And, I can't think like that. So, yeah, that, that scene with the snake, that one really resonates me. That sense of freedom, and finally being able to, for the snake to go figure himself out, and or herself. Anyway, oh my God, we're getting close to an hour already. I have so much to say with all this. So, um, I lost track of my notes again. Sorry about that, people. I know I could edit all this, but because I'm doing this all by myself and have to figure shit out, unless it's a very big gaffe or mistake where I will write the timestamp that I need to eliminate, you're just going to have to roll with this, because I'm going to roll with this. Anyway, let's jump down to one last thing before we wrap this up. So, in talking about all these mental escapes and feeling like something just fell, one of the things that I started doing as I got older was start doing something that I call a fantasy journal. I'm not going to go into detail about that, but if you go to TikTok, I'm going to do a post about this after I get this posted and go into more depth about it, because it turns out, and I learned this when I was finishing my bachelor's degree, that this is actually a therapy modality under the umbrella of cognitive behavior therapy. And in a nutshell, it's just envisioning your life. I write it as an actual journal. I put the date of the end of the month. So if I were going to sit down and use the fantasy journal today, being the 28th of May, the 25th as I'm recording this, but the 28th as this is live for all of you, I would be jumping to June 30th. And then just write down, as it feels right, the different cool things that happen. Oh, I got 3 views finally on one of my podcast episodes, or I gained, 10 new followers because of my Harry Potter content, things like that. What I want to have happen. And yes, it's almost always positive and encouraging, but this is where the research come in that I mentioned earlier. So let's talk about why the fantasy journal is such an amazing tool. And this is based on actual research. So I'm going to be reading this. So I'm sorry I'm not looking at the camera for this, but it helps connect to established therapeutic principles, because it can help with cognitive restructuring, such as writing about hypothetical scenarios or recapping events allows you to reframe experiences, identify patterns, and challenge negative thought processes. This aligns with CBT's, cognitive behavior therapy. We're going to call it CBT from now on. Focus on restructuring unhelpful beliefs. Yes. Problem solving and goal setting. By envisioning solutions and future directions, your journal acts as a tool for structured problem solving. This mirrors techniques like solution-focused therapy, where clients are encouraged to imagine their preferred future. Yes. Visualization and mental rehearsal. Writing about an idealized version of your life taps into the power of visualization, which is often used in therapy to build confidence and motivation. It's a way of mentally rehearsing positive outcomes. Yes. And I'm saying yes to all these because this is exactly the benefits I have personally received. And now that I think about it, I better write down because this is such a fucking brilliant idea. A series of posts. Forgive me a minute. Fantasy journal. Okay. Number 4, self-reflection and insight. The act of journaling fosters introspection, helping you understand your values, desires, and emotional responses. This is a cornerstone of many therapeutic approaches, including acceptance and commitment therapy, which is called ACT. Yes, benefited from that too. Emotional regulation. Journaling provides a safe outlet for expressing emotions, which can reduce stress and improve emotional well-being. It's particularly effective for managing anxiety and depression. Yes. So, I'm going to say be on the lookout through the end of the weekend, which will be June 1st, for at least one in this series, because I have benefited greatly, and the fact that I stumbled into this as a way to escape mentally and got all of those benefits that I just read you, it can be a very powerful tool, and I will go more in depth with exactly how I use it. I will go in depth with an actual journal entry of mine within reason. There are some things I'm not going to share from the fantasy journal, but it's not that kind of fantasy. Get your minds out of the gutter. It's more, what am I looking for in my future spouse? Okay, we're not going to go there with that one, but you get what I mean. So I made it to the end of another episode. So before we wrap things up, though, I got one more note here for myself, and we're going to lighten things up a bit and talk about some fan theories. I already talked about that. We see the snake again, you guys. We see the snake again. So for those of you who are new to Harry Potter, we do meet the snake again, and it has a major role in Harry's journey moving forward when we see her again. So with that, we come to the end of this episode this week. Thank you for dealing with my ramblings and my stumbles. Like I said, we're just rolling with it, folks. So join me next week when we dive into Chapter 3, The Letters from No One. Have a wonderful week, Potterheads. I will see you next week.